This is the My Inner Therapist podcast. I am your host and empowerment coach, Nicole Seals. I believe the life that you want shows up when you expect it. When you take the time to gain self-awareness into why you do what you do. Whether you're just curious or you have a growing desire to be better, or you can't tolerate your life circumstances for another day, then I encourage you to take this journey with us. And like any road trip, you'll need to bring a few things. Come with an open mind, a sense of humor, and the courage to stand in your truth. We'll be standing right there with you because none of us are perfect. The goal is to laugh and learn our way to becoming our own inner therapist, to heal our wounds and create an ideal life. Join in the discussion by sharing your comments and thoughts. And if you're interested in having a free anonymous coaching session with me here on the show, you can contact me directly at hello@NicoleSeals.com, and that's Nicole with a K. Be sure to subscribe to the show and rate each episode on your favorite podcast app. To learn more, visit my website, NicoleSeals.com, for access to articles, videos, and self-help programs. You can also follow me on Instagram at My Inner Therapist or subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find all these links in the show's description. All right, enough with the intro. Let the session begin. Hello, all. This is the My Inner Therapist podcast, and I am your host and empowerment coach, Nicole Seals. And I want to have a truth moment with you today. And by that, I mean I want us to dig in deep and speak on our truth with courage and openness and no judgment. I want us to have a discussion today where we practice self-awareness on a level of the observer, where we just observe some of our behavior and we talk about if it is possibly showing up as a barrier in our lives, if it's preventing us from being who we want to be, if it's causing us to have some challenges in our relationship, if it seems to have us stuck and rooted in a place where we are struggling to grow and evolve, and what we can do about that. And I want to really focus in on a specific aspect of our self, and that is our self-worth. So I want you to come in closer, pretend it's just you and me, and we're having a little one-on-one talk about our self-worth. And I want you to see if you can recall a time or an experience when someone has made you feel less than, they've intentionally said or done something that made you feel inadequate or unworthy. Maybe it was during a heated discussion or an argument. Maybe it was through gossip. Maybe it was in the form of backstabbing. Or maybe it was to your face with a sweet smile in disguise. It sometimes dresses in disguise. Or maybe you were on the delivery end, where it was you who had spread the gossip or started a rumor, or maybe you threw some shade someone's way to cut them down, maybe to embarrass or humiliate them in front of other people. When I talk about this type of behavior, and I call this type of behavior combative competition. When we engage in combative competition with one another, it has a direct impact on our self-worth. And as we explore the idea of evolving, and we have all of these discussions here on the show where we're talking about self-awareness and how to change our behavior and how we really need to be much more conscious of our thoughts and the words that we use. We can't do this without laying the foundation of how we see ourselves and the value we attribute to ourselves, because it has so much to do with the filter we use to perceive the world and the decisions we make about our actions and the words that we choose to use and how we engage with other people in relationships. At the core of all of that is our self-worth or our self-respect. And when we think about self-worth, we want to identify it as the value that we place on ourselves, and that includes all of the opinions and beliefs that we hold about ourselves. And what a lot of people don't understand is that many of the things that we do, many of the damaging or detrimental behaviors that we engage in, are as the result of our feelings of not being worthy, of being unworthy. And we are driven to do things to try to make ourselves feel better, to make ourselves feel whole, to make ourselves feel appreciated, to make ourselves feel special, to make ourselves feel powerful. And I want to go through some of the different ways that we do that under this umbrella of combative competition. And I call it combative because there are many forms of competition that are good and healthy, whereas combative competition has the motive of engaging someone in a way to where there is a change in status, whether that's a status of power, status of privilege, status of intelligence, status of beauty. We are looking to come out of the experience being better than the other person. And that's combative not only against the people that we engage with, but also it's combative against self. And I want to talk about what that means a little bit more, because that's really where it becomes so damaging to ourselves and to our self-worth. So one of the first ideas I want you to consider is when we talk about competing, what we have to acknowledge is that when we engage in this type of competition, and whether it's with one person or a group of people, we have to acknowledge that what it does is it distracts us from our own critical assessment of self. It's much easier for us to look at other people and to be critical and to judge them than it is to take that light and turn it around and to shine it on ourselves and to take a look at our own behaviors and our own patterns that may be harmful to ourselves and who we are trying to be in the lives that we're trying to live. That can be a painful experience. There's the belief that when we do that, we might see something that we may not be able to recover from, because the belief then is that we can't overcome it or we can't change. It then becomes much easier to look externally outside of ourselves and to look at another person, and to often what we do, right, is to project our own criticisms, our own issues, and the things that we don't like about ourselves, and to project those onto the people around us. And sometimes we find very willing partners to do this with, and probably because they are looking to do the same. They're looking to project this discomfort with self onto another person so that they don't have to deal with it, that we don't have to feel what we perceive to be pain of having to see ourselves in that light. So we often look outside of ourselves to other people, and we can find a whole host of things that we dislike about them, that we disprove, and that we are so comfortable in making a judgment about who that person is. And I'm sure right now you can think of so many instances in your life where you may see that happening. It could be in your workplace, right? The workplace is incredibly competitive. And while there can be forms of healthy competition in the workplace, what you often find are people are coming from this place of scarcity or from the belief that certain titles and certain positions, certain projects, certain responsibilities, that they have a value attached to them, and that somehow sets a person apart from the rest by they're better. They hold this title, and so they're better or they're more powerful. And because we look at that from this perspective of it's a limited position, it's a limited title, there's only so many people who can hold that title, it becomes much more appealing. Your drive to want to be powerful, to want to feel powerful, means that I must attain that in order to achieve this sense of power in my life. And that's where you can choose to either engage in healthy competition, where you work really hard so that you can be acknowledged in the same way, and then you also accept when you fall short, and you remain committed to trying again. Or you can take the option of engaging in combative competition, which is when you begin to engage in office gossip, or you talk about the person behind their back. And any chance you get, you're knocking them off their pedestal. You're talking about their work and how, well, I'm the one who actually did that project. And he or she is just taking credit for it. That is, as we talked about before, it's much easier for me to critique the other person than to acknowledge that I may not have risen to the occasion like I needed to do. We can come up with a ton of different examples of how this happens. I think one of the most prevalent ones is what we see on television with reality shows. When you have people, especially when you have the shows like, the Real Housewives shows, where you have mostly women who are engaging with one another, constantly trying to one-up the other person or humiliate the other person or make the other person feel small. And I'm not making a judgment if you choose to watch the show, because we live in a time now where we consider this to be a form of entertainment. But I want you to really think about what it is that you're getting out of watching two people or a group of people engage that way. Like, when you watch that, what comes up for you? What do you see that as a possible template or roadmap or example of how you could make yourself feel better by making someone else feel small? Or, when you've had someone who said something to you and it was really upsetting and you didn't know what to say in the moment, and you left the experience thinking like, oh God, I wish I would have said this, or, your mind is just on overdrive coming up with all the things that you should have said and you didn't, and you can't sleep, and you wake up the next day, and then maybe you write a few things down on a Post-it. And I am sharing this from experience because we've all been there. And then you're just waiting for the next opportunity where you can have a retort back to this person. You have a reply and it's sassy, or it's really smart, or it's just like you found like this thing about them that maybe they're insecure about, and you use that to make them feel small, like they made you feel small. And what I want you to ask yourself is, are you experiencing real growth when you engage in that kind of behavior? Or is it possible that when you are making somebody else feel small, that you've bought into a belief that somehow makes you the bigger person, that you become the smarter, wiser, sassier, funnier, prettier person of the two when you have humiliated someone else? And I know I know that you already know the answer to that, which is that no, it is not. It is not growth. It's actually the opposite of growth. There is a built-in, inherent insecurity in that type of behavior. When we have to seek people, when we're using people as a way to establish our own value, when we're looking outside of ourselves. And that leads me into the second point I want to talk about, which is how this type of combative competition really sets us up to stay in this place of where we're constantly seeking external validation. So we have to start using experiences with other people as a way to establish our value in the world. And so I may seek out that person who, made me feel bad about myself 2 years ago when she made that comment in the break room. And now that I've got my reply back to her, and maybe I got a little dirt on her in the process, and I'm going to confront her with it, and I'm going to walk away feeling taller and better about myself as a result of it. And what we're actually doing is giving so much of our power away to that other person. And this idea that you are going to leave that experience a more evolved version of yourself is a false belief. There's no truth to it. It's what we tell ourselves. It's what we try to convince ourselves of. And I don't think anyone has ever walked away from that experience and saw their life change as a result of having made another person feel small. And while that, they could have left that experience and acquired more financial wealth, or maybe they went back to their lives of having all these material possessions that they surrounded themselves with that made them feel valued. And now they have this experience that they've told themselves, well, this established my value even more. All of those things are what we call false beliefs. They are beliefs that we tell ourselves as a way to prevent really identifying the feelings of unworthiness that is at our core. That's why we seek to acquire things in the first place. We're always looking to fill a void. We're always seeking to somehow make ourselves feel whole. And what many of us do, myself included, and you see this with people who are incredibly successful, who are incredibly wealthy, who have surrounded themselves with material possessions, and who are deeply depressed or who feel unfulfilled. They don't have any satisfaction in their lives. They continue to seek out more and more because they feel like they're missing something. And what that is that they're missing is the establishment of self-worth that comes from within. And it can only come from within. If you want it to be long-lasting, if you want it to be real, if you want it to be unshakable, meaning that nothing in the external world can break or destroy or damage that value once it has been set, the only way to achieve that is by having it come from within. You being the person who determines your value. And only then can you engage in the world with a way to where you don't have to find and seek out ways to affirm that value, to remind yourself like, yes, I'm a valuable person. The third way I want to bring up at this point is the way we can engage in combative competition is when it comes to our belief about worthiness. And one of the ways that we kind of trick ourselves into thinking that I need to go back to the experience that I had earlier that was so hurtful, and I somehow need to rectify that so that I come out the bigger person, is we've convinced ourselves by buying into the belief that by being better than them, I become worthy. So my being worthy is now totally dependent on me in some way demonstrating that I am better than that other person. And anybody who is active on social media sees this happening all the time. Social media has ratcheted up our our competitiveness with one another to a whole new level. And what you see happening as an observer, and maybe sometimes you engage in the behavior as well, is you have this sometimes indirect competition by becoming a voyeur in someone else's life. Like you're looking at their pictures and you're convincing yourself that their lives are so much better. And so you feel as if you need to one-up them, or at least demonstrate that you're living your life like it's golden too, right? So you go out and you take pictures, or I'm aware that many of my clients have gone through the lengths of planning a special outing or going somewhere that they typically would never go, or spending money on an event that they don't have the money to spend, so that they can have a photo op and taking pictures of themselves and then being able to post that online. Like, look, I'm out and about. I'm doing important things. I'm hanging out with important people. I'm living this fabulous life. And that's the indirect way that we compete with other people. And we post all of our stuff up online, and then we wait for the validation, right? It's our dependence on the external validation. And it comes to us in the form of likes, or people following us, or people making comments. And then we tell ourselves like, oh, it worked. It worked. I am awesome. And now everybody knows it because I've posted all of this up and people love it. And then what happens after that? A couple days go by, you go back online, and someone's one-upped you. And the really crazy part is most of the time that this is all fabricated in our minds. It's not as if you and this other person are meeting being like, okay, listen, so I saw that you went to Disneyland last weekend. I'm just letting you know right now that I'm headed to Disney World. We're assuming that this other person is having the thoughts of, oh, poor Sarah, she hasn't posted anything. She must be just living in this really sad, desperate little world. I don't ever see her posting selfies on tropical islands. And the reality is that other people aren't thinking about us. They're thinking about themselves. Yet we've engaged in the story in our minds that people are looking at us like we have no lives, that we're not important, that we're not doing anything important. And that's really part of when I talk about faulty beliefs and how those tie into our self-worth. It's because we create these ideas and beliefs and rules that have no basis in reality. They come from our insecurities. They come from that inner voice telling us that we're not enough and we need to be doing these things to prove to the rest of the world that we are. So that leads me into point number 4, is that what ends up happening is our focus, we become hyper-focused on our need to prove to other people. And what that does is it distracts us and it shifts us from the focus of self-awareness, of having recognition of the self and how we really truly want to show up in this world and what that looks like. We spend far more time thinking of what I need to prove to other people and how I can do that than we do considering This is how I really want to be. When I think of my ideal self, this is how I envision that. And I imagine that my ideal self would behave in a certain way and would have certain rules for their lives and would engage in certain behaviors. We rarely have that conversation with ourselves. And what I'm suggesting is that that's the conversation that we need to be focusing on more. That internal conversation that we have where we are in a role of an observer and we're allowing ourselves to imagine the ideal version of our lives, the ideal version of who we want to be. And in a non-judgmental, loving, kind way, thinking of how that person would show up in the world. Yet instead, we spend our time thinking, well, I need to prove who I am to other people, and then I become that ideal version of self. I become idealized in the eyes of other people, but not in your own eyes. As you turn that view back on yourselves, you'll always see yourself coming up short. And that takes me to number 5. This is our last point when we're talking about combative competition and how it diminishes our self-worth, is when we engage in that type of combative competition, what it does is it gives us a false sense of power. It makes us think that we have elevated ourselves in a way where we've evolved. We've become wiser. We've learned a new skill. We've retained some ability to manage our emotions so that we have more control over how we show up in the world. And the reality is that we have actually relinquished our power when we engage in that type of competitive behavior. And when I say relinquish our power, it means that we have allowed ourselves to be affected and influenced by other people, and that influence is what's determining our behavior. That's the influence that's making our choices and our decisions. It's driving us. It becomes our motivation. So we have no power or control over what we're currently doing. And I know you've had an experience where someone has hurt you, or someone has made you feel small, or someone has embarrassed and humiliated you. And you know the feeling of being motivated to, and seek vengeance sounds so like superhero movie, but I'm going to use it for now. But we want to seek out some revenge. We want to right a wrong. We want to prove ourselves. We want to make the other person feel as bad as they made us feel. And there's no self-motivation in that. We are purely motivated by the emotion that we attach to that experience, which is pain or hurt or humiliation, anger. That is what drives us. That's what's fueling us. And the thing that shifted us, the powerful force that shifted us to take that kind of action, was the other person, was that external force. So we're giving our power away when we allow someone else to have that much of an influence on us. You know, I'll share with you that the way this showed up for me in my life was really in my close relationships within my family, with many of the females in my family, the women in my family. And it was really unnoticeable to me at the time. I had no awareness that the relationships and how I was engaging in them had become toxic, that I was not in a position of power, that I was not really controlling my emotions and managing them well. But I was in this constant state of having to prove myself that I was worthy of their attention or love or affection, and that the combative competition was proving to others who I was. Like, it was establishing my value. Like, oh, like, look at her, she's smart, and she's got her stuff together, and so she's doing the damn thing, right? So that was what I had convinced myself. And with some self-awareness and with learning what my own value was and being the person who determined that, and then learning how to practice how that showed up in the world, only then was I able to look back on past experiences and see how I had diminished myself and how I willingly gave up my power in those situations. And, in support of my family members and the women in my family, I think the same experience that I had, that they were going through as well. I think all of it stemmed from a place of us each feeling unworthy in our own way. And relationships are really the place that we come to work on ourselves. I know that's not what many people want to believe. We believe we go into a relationship to get our needs met, but a relationship is how we work on ourselves. It provides us an environment where we engage in relation, and you have to learn how to relate with other people. And so in that work shows up in ways that we don't often understand, and we really blindly go into it thinking that I just want to go into this experience feeling better about myself and come out of it feeling better about myself. And if that means that I have to engage in, whether it's gossip or talking behind someone's back, and a common thing that happened in my family was that each of us would pit one another. We'd pit another family member against another family member. There was a lot of talking behind one another's back and talking about the other person and talking, making judgments about their behaviors, making judgments about their character, and creating false stories about who they were or something that they had done in order to make ourselves look like the bigger person. And when this is happening with your family, it can become so normalized, and it can start to become so familiar that this is just how you engage. It becomes expected, and it can even become entertaining. And while that hurts me at my core, I feel pain in my chest right now as I say it, it can become entertaining. There were times where I would engage in gossip and laugh. There were times where I talked about people in a way that was not kind and found humor in it. And at the time, I thought it was so innocent, and it was bringing me closer to the person that I was gossiping with, that I couldn't see how I was diminishing my value in the process. What I'm suggesting in this conversation, where I'm talking about competition, especially combative competition, and how we use other people to make ourselves feel better, or get used by people who are trying to make themselves feel better. What the point that I want to get across is that it doesn't serve us. It never has. It never will. The only thing that it will do is it will invite more competition back into your life. It will give you a false sense of power. It will give you a false sense of self-worth that is very temporary. You will have to continue to feed yourself with more and more external validation to sustain it. It does not lead you further down your road to evolve and grow. It does not bring you wisdom. It does not bring you peace. It is not the way to gain confidence in who you are and how you show up in the world. And I can tell you from over the past 3-4 years, and this is especially true for the women who come into my practice and the clients that I see, is that we are compromising our self-worth more and more and more. And most of the time it's happening without our knowledge. And I felt it was really important to do this show where I just identify what were some of the ways that this happens. Because I like I said, I don't think a lot of people are aware that it's happening, because we are emotionally driven to respond and react. And that's never going to get us where we want to be. So what we're going to do throughout this season on the show is we're going to continue to have more conversations about self-worth. And before we can really talk about how we boost it and how we improve it and how we get better at establishing our value, we really have to gain some insight and self-awareness into the things that are damaging our self-worth, that diminish our self-worth. And we're going to start here. We're going to start here with competition, and we're going to look at some of the other areas of critical, harmful, and destructive behaviors that we engage in that also influence how we feel about ourselves. So we'll be doing that in future shows. I hope that you are sure to listen in, turn us back on and listen in. And I really, really would love to hear what your thoughts are on what we talked about here today. I am curious if any of you have had some shared experiences, if you can relate to my experiences about the combative competition within family. Maybe you have a sibling that you've been engaged in this type of competition with for years. Maybe you have a parent. It is not abnormal for a daughter and mother to have this type of a relationship. I'd love to hear what your experience has been. Please drop me a comment. If you want to just personally share something with me, if you don't necessarily want to put it on a comment board, you can always go to NicoleSeals.com, go to my contact page, and send me an email through there. If you have a question about self-worth that you'd like for me to talk about on one of our future episodes, that's a great place for you to be able to let me know as well. And I want to thank you for listening in today. As always, I want you to leave the show today with some new information and maybe even a new way of thinking when it comes to how you engage with the people in your lives, whether it's with your women friends, whether it's with your buddies, if it's with the boys in your crew, however you anytime, I just want you to think about any of those times where you have been on the receiving end of some of this behavior. And then I want you to just get really honest and truthful with yourself and think about those times where you might have been on the delivering end of that behavior, and see if you can't trace it back to your own feelings of unworthiness. And what we'll do is we'll talk about how we move on when we have the recognition of, yeah, you know what, I recognize that I am feeling unworthy. And these are the ways that it's showing up. I want you to know that it is possible and loving, and it feels like freedom when you can take yourself from a place of feeling unworthy and transform your thinking and your sense of being and your sense of self to this place of knowing your value and having that show up in the world. Because I guarantee you won't have to work so hard anymore at trying to get people to buy into it. It happens automatically. People sense it, they feel it, they hear it when you speak. And I know that that's how we all want to show up in this world. It is very possible to do. And we just got to take this first step where we get honest with ourselves and we recognize what we want to stop doing, what we need to stop doing before we can have our growth and our evolution. Okay, that's it for today. Remember, you're not lost. You're just being held hostage by your old way of thinking. Until next time, friends.